to those that are later. Any questions before we get started? Very well. I just want to thank Taj Mahal and the NAACP because it is through his leadership and vision that we said that in this work that we were going to do, that we needed to make sure that we had several foremen. Also for Reverend Jernigan and Lorenzo Grayson at Young Lives and Family Spirit in particular. Really excited about that as well. This wouldn't happen without BEMA, the Berkeley Black Ecumenical Ministers Alliance. And so for all the BEMA colleagues, we are so thankful for them, friends of Adeline and others who are joining us in this work. And so we want to make sure that we give those acknowledgments and shout outs as we go forward. And a big shout out to my brother from another mother, Teacher Sam, and just, his ongoing work with the NAACP and his years in the Teachers Union. So we just are thankful and so grateful to many of you. And from my family at McGee, I love you and appreciate all that you do. Amen. Amen. Michael, why don't you go ahead and cue that presentation up. In this work that we are doing with the Berkeley Faith and Justice Coalition, one of the things that we have said, it's so important that we are educating and challenging one another about making sure that we are engaged in the process. Again, remember, we're moving towards our community-wide action is really going to be focused primarily on the city of Berkeley, the Berkeley School Board, and a couple of things in Alameda County. But we want to make sure that our constituents, no matter where you live, even if you live in Contra Costa County, if you live outside of Oakland or Berkeley, that we make sure that we get information to you, because most of us know that there is an ongoing disinformation campaign. And I can speak a little bit about that. Some of it comes from places of ignorance. Some of it comes because it's deliberate. And I think that one of the things that we end up doing is we ignore things until the fire is burning in our backs, and we don't want to do that. And, whatever people say about voting or the voting process, it is important for us to try to do the best of our ability to give folks information, to organize and get people out so that we can speak. And if you choose not to participate, that should be on you. It shouldn't be because organizations like churches, like the NAACP, bury their heads in the sand. Amen. So I want to make sure that we give people opportunity. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk just about the 2024 timeline first. We'll talk about who can vote, and then I'll jump very briefly around President and Senate races, California ballot initiatives, particularly the one that's really pressing right now for the primary. I'll talk a little bit then about Berkeley and Oakland and Alameda County in terms of where we are. Next slide, please. So next slide, I'm sorry. Back. Okay. When are the major elections in 2024? So if you have not gotten information in the mail, if you haven't followed TV, let's be clear. The California primary is Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. To vote in that election, the election deadline, the registration deadline is the 20th of February, the 20th of this month. And that's why it's important that we get this information to you, because basically it means you got about a week and a half to be registered, okay? The national election isn't until November 5th. And the registration deadline for that is like 15 days before Election Day. Registration by mail, if you do registration by mail, it has to be postmarked 15 days before November 5th. So it gives you time. In-person registration, you can do it up until the day that you vote, up until Election Day. Okay, but the pressing thing right now is for the California primary, March 5th, and there's a couple of things on the ballot that we'll talk about. It is February 20th, okay? And again, these slides will be available to everybody like everything else. I will have Michael send these slides out so people can know. Next slide, please. Just want to uplift a quote Dr. King was famous for. He said, when we look at modern human beings, we have to face the fact that we suffer from a kind of poverty of spirit, which stands in glaring contrast with a scientific and technological abundance. You know, folks always want to talk about scientific advancements and technology. You know, the big thing now, everybody talking about AI, and that's all cool. But again, Dr. King said this like 50 years ago, over 50 years ago now. Yeah. And he said, we've learned to fly the air as birds. We've learned to swim the seas as fish, yet we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. I think that's something that's so apropos because we always want to talk about advancements, right? Everybody got a new way of doing things and there's a new technology and stuff. And, you know, despite our technological and scientific advancements, we have become more like the beasts that roam the jungle, right? And turn our so-called cultured societies into no more than urban jungle. So I just think that's something about why we need to be organized. And there's something bigger than politics at stake with us. Next slide, please. So who can vote? You know, that's been a big issue, y'all know, particularly over the last 6 years, right? Last 6 to 8 years. This thing about voter eligibility and voter tampering and voter interference and all this stuff. So let's just be clear, okay? Next slide. If you are registered to vote, right? You know, and we're talking about California right now, right? All registered voters can vote in a primary or general election. This is from the Secretary of State of California. Okay, so when people start saying stuff, this is straight from the Secretary of State of California. Need to be a United States citizen and a resident of California, 18 years of older on election day, not currently serving a state or federal prison term for the conviction of a felony, okay? Not currently found mentally incompetent to vote by a court. Now, I'm gonna say this, when we look at some of these candidates, they may be incompetent, but they ain't been found mentally incompetent. I'm gonna leave that alone. But to pre-register to vote in California, all right, you must be 16 or 17 years old and meet all of the other eligibility requirements to vote. And again, this information is available. So a lot of times when I talk about disinformation, people say stuff, but it is not accurate. It is not accurate from the state of California, definitely not from the Secretary of State, and some of it is just foolishness. And again, I know that people, the issue of voting for some people is an emotional issue. It you know, it's very, very practical. You know, and some people, you know, talk about particularly, for groups who have been historically ostracized and marginalized. You know, well, what are the tangibles? And I think those are really great arguments. I have no problem with people having those arguments, but if that is that, you know, you just, you know, don't care, you're going to be apathetic to stuff, you know, our responsibility, once again, is just to give you the information. Okay? We want you to make sure that you are informed in whatever you're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, so in Berkeley in particular, what we say the easiest way to register is on the Secretary of State's website. Um, this is actually, stuff from the city clerk. And the city clerk in Berkeley is a really a smart, really bright guy. I worked with him for many years when I was the secretary for one of the commissions for the city of Berkeley. Um, and between the city clerk and the city attorney, Berkeley's pretty good to making sure that information is out, right? You need a driver's license or a state ID card, your birth date, social security number. You can also pick up a paper registration form at any public library or post office. And that's not just true in Berkeley. I know my cousin Angela is on, and she is a librarian, and there are always voter registration forms in paper. Okay, we need to understand. And again, the deadline for the March 5th primary is February 20th. You can also register same day if you go to an in-person voting center. So you can go to any in-person voting center, but you need to check where your local polling place is. Where's my ballot? All registered Alameda County voters will be sent a ballot in the mail. So if you are already registered, you should have received a ballot in the mail. I got mine in the mail last week. So I know that ballots are coming out. Okay. So if you are registered in Alameda County in particular, and you have not received your ballot in mail, it's important. It says, you can track your vote by using the website. I didn't put the website in here, but I will make sure Michael sends that out with these slides. Next slide. One of the things, we talk about California being a liberal or left-leaning or more of a progressive state. And in Alameda County in particular, that is true. But I want you just to check some numbers real quick, right? While Democratic voters outnumber Republican voters by nearly 5-1 in Alameda County, right? 220,820 people, or 23%, almost a quarter of the voters in Alameda County have no party preference. I think that's important to note. Mm-hmm. No party preference. So a quarter of the voters, they're probably more concerned about the issues than party. And unfortunately, in our two-party system, what we end up getting is the headlines on TV and over the internet and social media are always dominated by, what the Democrats are doing, what the Republicans are doing, liberal this, MAGA this, and so on and so forth. But I do think it's important in a county, particularly even in a progressive county like Alameda County, that almost a quarter of the voters don't have a political preference, which means they are probably more concerned about the issues that are happening in their communities where they live. That's something for us in terms of organizing. We need to be very clear about when we're really trying to get people up. Issues do matter to people. There are some people that are just bound to a party, and God bless them. That's what they do, whatever. But let us not forget about the issues that mean things to the people. Next slide, please. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we do need to talk about the president elections for the fall in the Senate. Just very quickly, next slide. Y'all know who the usual suspects are. The Democrats have two people currently on the ticket. President Biden and Dean Phillips. You know what the major issues are. Mainly around Biden has been around his age, his competency, and then people talk about the economy, the wars, the conflicts in Israel and Gaza. That's where it is. Donald Trump is the leading candidate. for the Republican Party, but Nikki Haley has not dropped out. Ryan Brinkley, a pastor and businessman, is also still in the race.
Yeah.
But Trump more than likely is going to be that nominee. I do want to mention that in terms of independents and third-party candidates, there is Robert Kennedy Jr., who's kind of a master of conspiracy theories. There's Dr. Cornel West, who's really tried to continue to lead what he calls his People's Poverty Campaign, and Jill Stein, who's been the Green Party nominee on a couple of ballots. You guys pretty much know what most of the issues are and what they aren't, so I don't want to spend a lot of time there, but that is who is running for president. Next slide, please. Terms of California Senate for that seat that Senator Feinstein could not finish out. On the Democratic side, the front runner pretty much is Congressman Adam Schiff, followed by actually Katie Porter, and then Barbara Lee, who actually represents this district. I will say that, on the issues, Katie Porter probably represents the most progressive of the three, followed quickly behind Barbara Lee. Adam Schiff is the front runner right now. He is the front runner. There's a lot of work that has been going on in the Bay to really support Barbara Lee's campaign and the things that she represents. She's really stationed a lot in LA now. But the truth of the matter is, right now it's an uphill battle, but she is in the fight, and she is really unrelenting. But that's where we stand. On the Republican side, the leading candidate is Steve Garvey, the former Los Angeles Dodger, big time Trump supporter, fairly conservative, as is Eric Early, a businessman, a businessman, but more of a Republican moderate. Next slide, please. So one of the things I really wanted to get to is California ballot initiatives. There are 9 ballot initiatives. Most are in the fall, but there is, for the March 5th primary, one very important one we'll talk about in a minute. And then there's one for the fall, but there's going to be 8 others for the fall that I'm not going to go over because time's not going to permit, but we will be dealing with those in a letter at a later date in a separate presentation. Next slide, Mike. Okay. So I know you've probably seen the ads about California Proposition 1. That is the Behavioral Health Services Act. Years ago, the Mental Health Services Act was passed in 2004. The measure which changed that language to the Behavioral Health Services Act. And I will tell you, using the term mental health, particularly over the last 3 years, has been, an issue that many providers and even some responders say it stigmatizes folks that are dealing with mental and emotional issues. And so they want to change the terminology to behavioral health services as opposed to mental health services. But that's only one thing. So you need to understand what a yes vote supports. It doesn't just support changing the name, okay? But it does talk about expanding its purpose to include substance use disorders, including persons without a mental illness. You know, not everybody that uses controlled substance necessarily has a mental illness. Amen, somebody. So, unfortunately, what that means too is it changing, you know, how that 1% tax. So there is a 1% tax that was enacted in 2004 on people who had incomes above $1 million, right? And how that's spent under the law, including requiring 30% of the behavioral health services fund to be allocated to housing intervention programs. A big piece of that, and the governor has supported this, a big piece of that is really about veterans. What the governor is arguing and the supporters are arguing, that the truth of the matter is that veterans have been on, you know, the short end of the stick, and that voting yes means they can reallocate that money to really support folks that are experiencing behavioral issues, health issues, but especially to veterans. It talks about allocating that money, that fund, to housing intervention programs, and increasing the size of the Oversight Commission, which is currently 16 people, to 27 voting members, and issuing $6.38 million in bonds to fund the housing for homeless individuals and veterans. We just talked about that, including up to $4.4 billion for mental health care and drug or alcohol treatment facilities, and $2 billion for housing of homeless or unhoused persons. That's what a yes vote means. Similarly, a no vote, you know, opposes changing the Mental Health Services Act and issuing 6.3 billion bonds for homeless and individual veterans. Let me say this about the no vote, and this is important. One of the concerns, you know, that we've had locally, and Pastor McBride and I Live Free have had this conversation. So there is a piece that is contained in voting yes that also is kind of in the details. People don't have a choice for treatment. So some treatment is forced. And while I understand there are, you know, very different situations for folks that may be experiencing mental or behavioral health problems, there are different issues for folks that may be unhoused, different issues for veterans. The only thing that I would say, and again, we're not here, you know, just to tell you, to vote yes or no. I will tell you, it is important that you do understand that when you start talking about forced treatment, as well-meaning as the governor or other people may be, that the people that end up getting forced treatment, unfortunately, are usually poor people and Black and brown folks. So just understand, what that means when you talk about forced treatment. This is one of the things that you do have to be very careful about in understanding language. I will tell you that law enforcement is very much on the yes side of this. The providers are split kind of down the middle. The League of Women Voters is definitely on the no side of this. And those that are arguing for the no thing, they really highlight the fact that this issuing of more bonds becomes more of a tax burden on the state. And just as importantly, not just as it a tax burden on the state, but the reallocation of money basically means that it's probably going to be pulling money from existing treatment facilities and existing programs. So I would just be cautious about it for those reasons around forced treatment and around the reallocation of services. Next slide, please. This is for the fall, but I do just want to highlight very quickly, again, those other initiatives we'll talk about at a later date. But the minimum wage initiative, California, will have on the ballot an $18 an hour minimum wage initiative. It's qualified for the ballot, for November 5th. Yes Vote supports increasing the state minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2026 for all employers, and thereafter adjusting the rate annually with increasing cost of living. A no vote, basically maintains the existing law designed to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour for employers by January 23, which means there's no increase. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to do, what to vote for, but for somebody trying to support themselves, let alone support a family on $15 an hour, $18 an hour, is still almost unconscionable in California, especially in the Bay Area. But statewide is just something you need to think about. I think that people are deserving of increases. $18 an hour, not only does it not get you rich, it doesn't get you nowhere near the kind of money you need to make living in the Bay if you got to pay a mortgage or pay rent. Again, let alone if you're trying to support a family. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Next slide, please. Before we go on, are there any questions right away? Any questions about anything that we've said so far? Okay, if there being none, I do want to bring your attention to the state Senate candidates that are running in this area to replace Nancy Skinner. They are Berkeley Mayor Jesse Arguin, AC Transit Director.
Excuse me, Pastor Mike, excuse me.
Yes.
Can I backtrack for a minute and ask you a little bit more about what you said about Proposition 1?
Yes. Go ahead.
So are you saying that the downside of Proposition 1 is that other necessary services would be cut and that maybe this is a forced initiative?
Yeah, to some degree, Angela. Here's the deal. When they start talking about reallocating services, like what most politicians don't really want to talk about, right, is that the money obviously comes from a tax base, right? And so there's this $1 million for people, this tax on people that make above $1 million that probably doesn't apply to most folks, on this call. But the reality is that as services are allocated, there are treatment programs, treatment facilities, and essentially when they're saying reallocating, you're not talking about an increase of funding. And so what part of the concern is, and I think all of us know that a lot of this is tied to what is going on in major cities, San Francisco, LA, particularly with large populations of unhoused folks and especially large populations of unhoused veterans and those that may be living with issues of substance abuse. So the issue is that if the money is reallocated, where is the funding going to be reallocated to? Is it really more for, for forced treatment? Is it more for law enforcement? It's not going to be reallocated to give more money to some of those existing programs that really don't get enough to survive. So I think that would be the real question. I think that one has to ask themselves, and part of this from a political standpoint. I'm not saying that a yes vote is altogether terrible, but from a political standpoint, this has to do with the fact that we know there is a lot of attention on cities and, bigger cities in California, San Francisco, San Jose, LA and others, and Oakland, even though Oakland's not really a big city, but they have a huge population, disproportionate number of people that are living with homelessness. And some of those folks are, substance abuse. And here's the issue. Here's the big issue that we got to deal with when we talk about forced treatment, Angela, is that, again, the nation has a history when you start talking about forced treatment or misguided treatment. You start talking about things like the Tuskegee experiment and others, right? I just think you have to be very careful, because I think most of us agree that there's a huge issue. And I know Taj Mahal does a lot of work, with the unhoused population. There's a huge issue, where folks got to deal, with, unhoused, family members and unhoused populations, throughout the state and especially in the Bay. But most of those folks never got the kinds of services that they needed, whether they got addicted or not. They didn't get the services they needed. And the services are not necessarily administered with compassion or, the best interest of the people that are receiving services in mind. It is more of a window dressing to just say that we can deal with behavioral health, or if you want to call it mental health, or if you want to talk about the unhoused. And again, we do understand that it's a problem. All you have to do, is look in any urban area. In the Bay, we have a big issue in the Bay. How it's dealt with is a different issue. And even the governor, when he's saying in commercials that we have forgotten about veterans, well, that is true. That's not only a state problem, it's not only a local problem, it's a federal, it's a federal problem. But I don't want to put it all on the backs of veterans and the unhoused either. And so I do think that these comprehensive approaches do need to take place, but to say you're going to reallocate funds and really don't have a vehicle for how that's going to look, other than just taking existing funds from people that don't really have the resources to provide the services in the first place, becomes problematic.
Here's my other concern though, where that's involved. I work in a setting where there's a lot of people that have substance abuse issues that will not accept services.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, what do you do?
Absolutely. So let me tell you what I always tell people. And I don't know if anybody has ever had this experience, but for years, I worked with an agency that had to clean a homeless encampment. I have been in homeless encampments, and I don't know if anybody on this call has ever had the experience. I know it better than most people. I can't even tell you. I was laughing with Michael Jones the other day. I have seen things that folks see driving by, or they might see like with an individual. I have been and had to have crews cleaning up. I know exactly what the issues are. Trust me. And I do think that maybe there are some cases where people don't have the capacity, or the will to receive the services that they need. And I do think that's an ethical question, and there have to be some decisions that are made. What I will say, as somebody who's also been on the front lines for some of that stuff, I will say what usually happens when services are reallocated, it doesn't go to the folks that are really on the front lines, that are really trying to they're already under-resourced. And so if the issue is it's just going to go to law enforcement, or if it's going to go to health centers, that are funded by the public to do it, and people are going to be forced into housing or forced into treatment. The other thing you do have to consider is, and again, I'm not saying that can't be an option, but the other thing you got to consider is when you say forced housing or forced treatment, it's not like you and I are going, to Kaiser or Summit or somewhere like that. It's usually clinics and it's usually shelters that are already overcrowded. So again, I'm not saying that it is totally a bad thing, but I just think that we need to get information to be informed. So what are the results? Because truthfully, usually what happens with stuff like that, where it's forced treatment, the people are still ends up being out on the streets a couple of months later. And you still, so basically it becomes a band-aid on a broken leg. And so I don't have, the answers, Angie. But I do think that at the end of the day, we need to be challenging and asking the questions. Whether we vote yes or no, to me, is not as important for what is the long-term solution. And I don't know, if a no vote, definitely is a long-term solution. I'm not sure that a yes vote is either. And I think that we need to be able to make sure that even if the measure passes, how do you hold local governments in cities, Alameda, Contra Costa County, Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond, whatever, accountable, but also at the governor's level, what does that mean if the measure passes? Any other questions? That's a great question, though. No other questions? All right, Mike, go back, go forward. I'm sorry. Back to the state senate, please. So I was saying, Jesse Arreguín, mayor of Berkeley, is probably the leading candidate, but also Javanka Beckles, who's currently an AC Transit board member, director, former city council member for the city of Richmond. Dan Cobb, current city of Oakland council member. Sandra Swanson, former state assembly member, and Kathleen Lieberger, who actually is the head of one of the local unions. And in terms of leading, in terms of fundraising, in terms of early votes, it is Arreguín and Lieberger. Javanka Beckles really does point, to her work with not only unions, but being a city council member previously, working publicly with AC Transit. She talks about the work that she's done hands-on in the community. Dan Cobb, as Oakland City Councilman, talks about the issues that he's really tried to work to resolve in the community around crime and justice and healthcare. Sandra Swanson says that he is the only um, um, leader of that group of these five people that has any experience in the state legislature. He, was an assembly member. He actually used to be chief of staff for Barbara Lee as well. And so he has a long history in Sacramento and to some degree in DC as well. Catherine Lieberger, talks about her, her work with unions and grassroots community organizing, and all that she has done, in Berkeley and Oakland in particular. In terms of when I say leading candidates, Mayor Arreguín, is actually number two when it comes to fundraising behind Lieberger. Lieberger has, a lot of union support. Um, um, Erguine has union support as well, but it seems that Erguine also has like probably more corporate support. Um, you know, Jesse is interesting in the sense that Jesse considers himself a progressive, but he calls himself a progressive with sense, and so he has worked with developers and in different avenues around housing, whether it's affordable housing or even market rate housing. Lieberger really talks more, about affordability and cost of living, and how she has really represented unions and been represented by unions. Um, I will tell you that, um, interestingly enough, interestingly enough, I'm not sure that either one is going to have a decisive victory. Right now, the race is open and it's up for grabs with anybody, but those two seem to be the front runners in terms of where they are. Any thoughts, any questions before we move forward? Very well. Let's move, Mike. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the city of Berkeley and the Berkeley Unified School District. Next. So in 2016, the Berkeley Unified School District passed what is called the BSEP parcel tax. And in 2016, what that did is the parcel tax for folks, it was 37 cents per square foot, right? That is up for re-election or reauthorization in the March 5th primary. And that would make it go up from 37 cents per square foot as a homeowner to 54 cents per square foot. So it says like for a median 1,450 square foot home, that's a price tag of $782 annually to support the schools, right? Again, I said this in 2016, they approved BSEP renewal with a measure tax rate of 37 cents per square foot. Like the previous reauthorization, very low income seniors and people living on Social Security benefits because of a disability are exempt from the tax, right? So the measure, says it'll bring in $44 million to schools, over the next 8 years, just under 20% of the district's budget. The funding is supposed to really pay for one of every 3 teachers in the district. It's also supposed to allocate money for enrichment programs like music and art programs. But only 7%, this is something that we got to think about, right? And I'll tell you the conversation Pastor McBride and I had about this, because we've been in this position before, not just in 2016, but in 2012, I think it was as well. Only 7% of that funding goes to family engagement services or academic support. And one of the things that when we were at Boca, and we supported this initially, one of the things that was really said to us by then officials in the school district is it was going to support a lot of family engagement services and academic support, particularly for a lot of our Black and Brown youth in Berkeley. 7% is not a lot. And I know that there are people on the call like Reverend Angela who've worked with family engagement. And I don't know, Angela, if you really want to talk about this, but we know that family engagement, despite some of their valiant efforts, there were some serious issues, right before the pandemic and even during the pandemic, especially in terms of access and capacity as it related, particularly to African American students in the district. Pastor McBride and I had a long conversation, a meeting, and one of the things that we want to do in terms of whether it passes or not, really holding the BSEP folks at the school district accountable to what is really happening with student performance, particularly for Black and Brown students, and why are we not leveraging more when it comes to family engagement? Because we know that is a huge issue where a lot of our children intersect with the school district, and not only where they intersect, but where their families need support services and intersect. Angela, I don't know if you really want to say anything about family engagement services and why that percentage is lower, if you want to.
Yeah, I would just say that the Office of Family Engagement and Equity is probably one of the best points of contact that many Black and Brown families have in a given school. In some schools, that is the person who helps them navigate the setting of the school and helps intervene if they're having trouble with teachers, and helps them connect to community leaders who can bring support if they're having trouble at school in any kind of way. Like many of the services for Black and Brown youth in the district, it's on the chopping block every year. And so a good portion of their annual effort is fighting for the right to continue to exist. So the fact that they don't have enough, there's not policy that ensures the ongoing services that this population needs in school. And before this organizing effort really began, there's not been an entity in the community that OFE has known to reach out to get community backing to keep it front and center where it needs to be. So it's really problematic that such a small percentage of BSEP funds are going to OFE. And that is something that I would love to see this group be a voice for, because it then also limits what OFE can do if a good portion of their time and energy and resource goes to having to organize to keep their funding from year to year. So it's not a very secure position for that office to operate from, and it's a really necessary one.
I appreciate that, Rev. And so Pastor McBride and I are going to be drafting a letter to the school board and the superintendent's office. I would love to follow up with you to help draft that this week. And I think the other thing is, this is going to be one of the big issues when we have our action in May, that we really want to make sure that either the superintendent's office or the school board members that we want to have there, that we really press that. So whether it passes or not, and it passed overwhelmingly, but I think Reverend Angela is right for the Berkeley Faith and Justice Coalition. I think that we need to make sure that we have our eyes on the parcel tax. And again, this is not supporting teachers, because surely we support teachers, and teachers need to make sure that we have class size reduction and all that stuff. But we do know, as Reverend Angela said, the point of contact for many of the Black and Brown students and their families is OFE. And so we need to say something seems a little out of balance if only 7%. And if family engagement is about family engagement, but the office is fighting to survive, as Reverend Angela says, that is the issue that we need to be able to hold the school district accountable to.
Yeah.
Any other questions that either myself or Reverend Angela can answer in this moment about that partial tax?
If I may.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I agree with everything that's been said. I don't have any problem with any of that. I also believe that Measure H is essential because of the amount of money it brings to the district. Yes, OFI needs to be fully funded. My sense is that the better avenue into that is through the LCAP, the Local Control and Accountability Program.
Okay.
Ann Caligari, I guess many of you probably know Ann Caligari, who was the past supervisor for OFI. Ann and I were talking at a school board meeting just a few weeks back, and it was her sense that LCAP is really where we need to be focused, because that's where we impact the budget. Measure H, the BSEP measure, one of its strengths over the years has been that it has always followed exactly to the letter the way it was written, what it's supposed to fund.
Mm-hmm.
Aging that funding is extremely difficult. It's shifting it around, but things that were not included in it can't be, it's very difficult to get them added.
Got you.
The LCAP is about paying the money out of the budget for the programs that we need to be successful, that our kids need to be successful. And that's the specific charge of the LCAP. So that may be a better avenue for us.
Sam, I think that's great. And you're refreshing my memory. When Pastor McBride and I were originally dealing with this, like 2012, there was really a lot of attention on the LCAP, even more than Measure H. And so I would love for you to join Reverend Angela and I, even online, and really talking about that as we start talking about, how to really hold the district accountable in that sense. Could I reach out to you with Reverend Angela, and then we could have a larger discussion about how we want to make sure that we word that so that the emphasis is not on Measure H per se, knowing that we can't really change the way the funding is allocated, but on the LCAP so that our kids get what we demand that they need.
I would be willing, I would be honored.
Okay, thank you.
Me
really
too,
appreciate that.
And I could reach out to Ann Caligari, or maybe Sam can, if we want her input at any point. Also.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You can talk more about that.
Okay, let's talk about that. And then the new current director of the department, I've just made email contact with in the last couple months. Sam, maybe you have a direct relationship, but that's somebody who would probably be invested in, would be happy to know that we're doing this, and would probably have a perspective that could help us.
We'll meet online, the three of us, and we'll move it from there.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you all. Mike, let's move to the next item. Okay, this is where it starts to get really messy. So right now, currently, there are 4 candidates filed for mayor. Well, there are 3 candidates, 4 candidates who filed, but there are 5 potential candidates. Mayor Eric Green, if he is unsuccessful in his state Senate bid, he has not filed for re-election yet, but he could file. And if he is not successful, probably will file and would probably be the front runner. The other candidates, I said 3, but there are 4. There's Adina Ishii, who was president of the League of Women Voters. And she is a businesswoman, attorney, and organizer activist. The other 3 are current or former city council members, and this is where it gets really sticky. Sophie Hahn, who is on the council, and is not necessarily running for reelection as council, has filed for mayor. Kate Harrison, who abruptly quit the council 2 weeks ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, has filed, and has, as is Rigel Robinson, who represents District 7 on the city council up near the university, and he's filed. Of the four candidates other than the current mayor, up until a couple of weeks ago, I would say that I would say Kate Harrison would have probably been the front runner of the other four. At this point, I think it's probably Sophie Hahn, because I think that there's some things that I'll talk about with the council that y'all need to be informed about. And this is the other stuff we need about holding, council members accountable for just the way the city is run or not run, is unfortunate. But this is, who is running for mayor. And there may be other candidates that enter the race, but this is where we are today. Any questions about that?
I don't have a question, but I do want to say that Lorenzo and I are meeting with Kate Harrison, who's then going to be speaking with the NAACP today, which I guess Taj Mahal has invited her to come speak. So we're going to be there for the NAACP meeting and speaking with Kate Harrison before the meeting. She's asked to meet with us. So anything you can say about your perspective on what all is happening, and what is a wise, I mean, we have a sense that we're mostly asking her questions, not saying a whole lot. But any advice you can give about that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I will definitely say this. I think, and this isn't just for Kate Harrison, this would be for anybody. I would say the question that should be asked is, how is she going to advance the best interests of the least of these in the community, and particularly when it comes to young people, the most vulnerable, of these Black and brown youth and their families. The same thing I would be said about some other populations that I know that she's mentioned before, the unhoused population, the behavioral or mentally challenged. What does that mean? What is her plan? That said, I think that what transpired on the council a couple of weeks ago was embarrassing. I didn't know that she had resigned right when she did. Quite frankly, Reverend Phillips called me that night and said, did you see what happened? And he said, I just read it in the paper the next morning. And so I called a couple of people on the council, whose names I won't mention, and they directed me to the video, and I saw the video, and it was chaotic, and it was embarrassing for all concerned. It wasn't just for Kate Harrison. It was unfortunate. It was an unfortunate piece, and I had some follow-up conversations with council members and staffers. And again, I don't want to mention names, but, people kind of said to me, as bad as it looked, Michael, the one thing you got to remember that the city, is a strong city manager, weak mayor format. And it doesn't mean that the city won't continue to run. And I get that. But to me, it's a bad look for public servants. When public discourse delves into in the middle of meetings, folks are kind of arguing, on camera, and, accusations of racism, sexism, and, you're back and forth. It's a bad look for everybody. And I think the most important thing, Pastor McBride and I had this conversation, that what we got to be honest about, about the dysfunctionality of our cities. And this is not just about Berkeley. We could say this about Oakland. We could say it about San Francisco. We could say this about Richmond. We say this all through the Bay. Pastor McBride and I were having this conversation. We were saying, what we got to be honest about, right, is that these cities that we're dealing with are not run, by the Tea Party or MAGA folks. These are so-called progressive, liberal people that are running these cities. And this is still where we are. And I think, it opens the door. It opens the door, maybe even rightly, to a lot of the accusations. Now, I have some theories about that, because I think that one of the things that a lot of progressive cities and progressive candidates got to deal with is that there is a multitude of agendas and special interests, where the conservatives oftentimes are only dealing maybe with two or three, but the progressives are often dealing with multiple special interests across the board. And so there's a whole host of issues. That said, I still think that there is a way in which you have to be able to handle yourself in the public arena. And what I witnessed and what I heard in that video did not reflect that. And my hope, not just for Kate Harrison, but for everyone concerned on the council and in the mayor's race, quite frankly, is those better angels within, would surface, and policy on behalf of the people, and especially the people that are most vulnerable, could get done, as opposed to folks just, doing business as usual. Oh, come, let me hear what, let me tell you what you want to hear so I can get your vote. That's kind of where I fall down. And that was the conversation that Pastor McBride and I had, that was really pointed in terms of where we were. So, it's not that again, not trying to harm nobody, but I was, as a native of this city, as a resident of this city, as somebody who matriculated all through the school system in this city, as somebody who pastors a church in this city, as somebody who used to work for the city, it was embarrassing to me. It was embarrassing to me. All right. Next slide, please. So given that I told you that Council Member Robinson resigned in District 7, that's the district up near the university, there is a special election on April 16th. If you are a member of District 7, if you live in that district by the university, to replace Council Member Robinson. In November, in District 3, Ben Bartlett, District 2, Terry Taplin, they are also on the ballot for November. Susan Wingraf is not running in District 6, so that is yet to be resolved. Now, here's the thing. While Harrison did resign, and we just talked about it, so I won't spend a lot of time in it. I do want to tell you, as of like Wednesday or Thursday, she had not submitted any official paperwork. So there is no special election, to my knowledge, yet, unless it occurred yesterday. There is no special election yet to replace her in District 5. and Reverend Angela just said she's going to be speaking at the NAACP. And Taj Mahal obviously will be leading that after this meeting. But just note that even though she abruptly resigned, she has not submitted official paperwork with the city clerk's office. So there is no date for a special election to replace her. Han vacated her seat to run for mayor. That's going to happen. And then Mark Humbert and Rashi Karswani, they're not up for re-election. Okay. So that's just the state of where it is. I still think that when we get to May 16th, and again, continue to keep that date in your head, continue to get folks out. I think however many of the council, and I don't think we need more than 2 or 3 of them there because we don't want to run into issues with the Brown Act, to violate the Brown Act, that we have a quorum in there. But I do think that we need to talk about functionality or dysfunctionality and have some questions. And again, we're going to be formulating that stuff over the next couple of weeks because we want to be prepared for May. Any questions about the state of the council or the mayor beyond that? All right, if there are no questions, I'll move on.
Did you say that the current mayor, if he loses his state Senate run, will run for mayor again?
Yeah, he will probably more than likely. And again, he didn't say that, but look, he has plenty of time to run to file. And so if he loses his state's Senate bid, he probably will file more than likely. So let me give you a thing. I'll get to Ben Bartlett in a minute. Ben Bartlett is running for Keith Carson's seat to replace Alameda County Supervisor Keith Carson, who's retiring. But he's already filed for re-election to the city council in case he loses. That's a strategy that politicians enact, and it's nothing to say that they can't do it. It's just the reality of what they will do. And again, please don't say that I said that that's what the mayor is going to do, because the mayor has not said that. But all indications point to the fact that even though he currently is probably the front runner for the state Senate seat, if something happens, he would probably still file to run for re-election for mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about Ben Bartlett in a minute, but I want to say this, and we were deliberate, and we'll talk more about this. The recall election for the DA, recall election for the mayor of Oakland, we're really not participating one way or the other. Part of the problem, and I'll talk about, there's a ballot measure that's going to talk about that in a minute, just the way that recall elections are filed. But regardless of what you feel about the Oakland mayor, and I have my opinions, and regardless of what you feel about the Alameda County DA, and I have, my feelings and opinions, the reality is organizationally, those elections have cost the taxpayers like millions of dollars. And because they're special interest groups, quite frankly, that most of us don't have a dog in that race, but we keep talking about the allocation of resources. I am like outdone on both sides of it, because the reality is folks get all emotional, but then we start talking about resourcing, and it's really not about resourcing as much as it is about, who's mad. And what we do is prey on people that are survivors of crimes, whether those are property crimes or crimes against the person, like assault and murder. But the reality is that there are things that probably could have been done and should have been done prior to the selection and election of both of those offices, and they weren't. And some people, really have some real policy-based opinions, and other people got sour grapes, and it's unfortunate, but that's where we are. And that's why, I'm just saying we not even trying to participate in all that. It's unfortunate, but that's where we've arrived. Talk about the Board of Supervisors. Again, Ben Bartlett, Berkeley City Council member in District 3. He is vying to replace Keith Carson, and he's probably one of the two leading candidates right now. And again, that could shift, that could change, but he, along with Nikki Fortunato, Bass in West Oakland, Oakland City Council member, they are probably the two. They are probably the two. More prominent figures right now. Nikki, really is a big advocate for housing and homelessness, and she really wants to run on that platform. Bartlett, is talking about the resources that he's brought to South Berkeley in particular, when it comes to housing and safer streets. I think both of them, have good points in some ways. Both of them leave a lot to be desired in others. Ben has been real big around, environmental emissions, zero waste, and food resiliency as well. Nikki's also, really big on pressing affordable healthcare. But those are the two, most prominent candidates in the area. Ben has deeper roots, obviously, in Berkeley than West Oakland. Nikki has deeper roots in Oakland than she does in Berkeley. But I expect the two of them to probably fight it out. John Bowders, the former Emeryville mayor, would probably be the next. And then the other person is Ken Barrett, who's on the Board of Education for Alameda County. He is the founder and the director of Seneca Center. To be honest with you, I've had to encounter Seneca Center many times in my former life. We had, in full disclosure, AmeriCorps members work for them. And when I was a part of a program with Alameda County, and then the then director of Alameda County, Chet Hewitt, was part of that group. I encountered Ken Barrett. I never found him to be somebody who had the best interests of our community, quite frankly, even though he profited a lot from the community, just being very honest with you. But he's a very powerful guy because of Seneca Center. Seneca Center had like over 100 beds. And don't let me get started about, just the whole foster care system and how people, have kind of pimped it out. The other person is Omar Farmer, and his positions on commissions, and oversight committees, particularly in Oakland, and advisory boards with Alameda County, would be the last person. But I think the first two right now are the front runners, with the middle two kind of being dark horses, and it could go either way. Keith Carson basically had been an institution in that district supporting West Oakland and Berkeley and Albany over the past 30 years or 35 years or so. And I don't think anyone really has that strong of a foothold, but those two would probably be the leaders right now. Any questions? No questions. Let's go to the next slide there. Also, these are the real dark horses. These last four people, former Oakland School Board member Greg Hodge, longtime activist, nonprofit director and attorney in West Oakland. A lot of us know Greg. Greg has run for mayor a couple of times. Chris Moore, would be another person. One of the things, about Chris Moore, he's a big person in terms of consulting around, property and rental housing. Still a dark horse. And Gerald Pachuknut, he has, he's like a big right-wing candidate. He's funded in part by Lyndon LaRouche and the LaRouche campaign. He's currently suing the county and actually suing Keith Carson's office. And then finally, when we get down to it, Laurel, I can't hardly pronounce her last name, but she's the current League of Women Voters president, and apparently filed at the last minute. And so I think these last four are really dark horses, with the first five that I said much stronger, and the first top two are probably, unless something changes, are probably going to find themselves in that seat. Next slide, Mike. So we were talking about recall. I was talking about recall. One of the things about recall elections, the language for recalls, and this is one of the things that needs to be cleaned up. Measure B, and I am urging people to vote yes on Measure B, because all Measure B does is, if you're in Alameda County voter, all Measure B does is update the language for recalls. The recall format and the rules based on the Alameda County Charter haven't been updated since like 1926, right? And some of the things, basically say that, like, in the current language, if a recall happens, they have to, I think they have to get the voters have to get the ballots, within a week or two, something like that, something really crazy. And if you think about how big Alameda County is, there's no way in 1 week, if the recall is filed and they got to get ballots out, particularly with vote by mail in a week, it's almost impossible. So it's really just kind of updating the language in the charter. But I think it's really important that be done, because people are kind of manipulating recall elections in the county. And again, regardless of what you feel one way or the other, I think we should all be hoping that the playing field is level. If folks want to recall, that is their prerogative if they get the signatures. But then we need to make sure that processes are in place so that the elections do remain fair. But that's all it is. It's nothing that really substantially changes what we're talking about. People still have a right to do that. Next slide, please. I think we're done. Mike, you can take it down at this time. I'll entertain any questions, thoughts. I know there's a lot of work that we want to do around the LCAP and the BSAP parcel tax. We've had some good discussions around Proposition 1 for March 5th. You do have the information about registering. We've talked a lot about candidates in Berkeley, particularly for mayor and council and the whole situation on the council. I want to open it up if there are any discussions. We've got a little bit of time left. Any questions or discussion that people need to have. And I do thank you because we moved through this pretty well. And we will have another forum in the late spring or midsummer as we start moving towards. So this is not the last of our voter education forum.
Did you say that Ben Bartley is already put in for a new term as council member?
Yeah, he's already filed. So if he doesn't,
Okay.
if he does not win that seat, he's probably still going to run in South Berkeley.
Okay.
Other questions?
I just wanted to actually give a little update that Lorenzo and I were going to be doing a fundraiser this afternoon for the Young Lives Matter Foundation has done a Berkeley Peace Walk. Last year we did 2 of them. And this year we wanted to raise some community funds for that, and then also raise funds in part to stipend some youth to be involved in leadership of some of the activities that we do in the community, including we wanted to stipend youth to be involved in this organizing that we're doing here with the Berkeley Coalition, Faith and Justice Coalition. So we had to postpone the fundraiser because of a number of things, but some of our speakers weren't available, and then it became clear that we were feeling the need to come to the NAACP meeting today, and so decided to delay our fundraiser. But I'd love to be able to tell this group about it when we do, so that we can get the word out, in part because part of what we're really wanting to do, I think, in this group is start building some youth leadership, because for young people to get to be with Pastor Smith, with the NAACP, like to be among you and be getting to be in this training. I mean, this is life-changing stuff for a young person. So, and what it could mean for our city if we have young people who are getting this training and really learning how to be part of collective voice and how to build collective power from the beginning. Just what a powerful thing that is. So I'm really excited about that. And we do know that building youth voice, cultivating youth voice, and supporting youth leadership is not a short-term project. It's really a long-term relationship building activity. So I don't know. I mean, we'll do our best to get some young people in the room by May 16th. That's a short timeline, but we'll do our best. But just in the longer term, that's really what we're aiming for. And we really are excited that the coalition is here to be that opportunity for them.
Excellent. That's great. And we should, Lorenzo and you and I, we should talk offline in terms of making sure that we have a thing to have a group of young people that we can listen to and also mentor at the same time. We are hopefully, in some of our work, we want to make sure that we get people, in Young Lives, people. I know Taj Mahal has really tried to elevate and get young people engaged in the NAACP. A lot of the young people in our congregations, we need to get them involved with service. You know, and it's not just service, you know, in church, but service in their communities, you know, in different ways. So we want to make sure we're elevating as we go. So I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Other thoughts, other questions? Tajmal, you got anything to share from the NAACP? You're muted, bro.
Let's see what happened.
You're still muted, Taj.
Sorry about that. No, I'm just saying that I'm looking forward to our meeting today with Kate, hear what she has to say. And I'm just seconding what you said about what my efforts right now is to have more youth engaged with this operation and with the NAACP. It's really time to pull them in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So little feedback for voter education. Has this been helpful? And y'all know I ain't got a big ego. So if this was a waste of your time, please tell me, because we want to make sure that we can augment this so it works. Because my goal, just so y'all know, and our goal for Faith and Justice Coalition is to make sure in our follow-ups we have some clarity so we can start formulating questions, and so that y'all can continue to have these one-to-ones with people, and making sure we fill that sanctuary up so that when we get to May 16th, you know, we want to have a minimum, you know, of 120 people in that church. You know, the goal would be to 200, but a minimum of 120 people in that church, because it's important that the school district and the city and the county understand that, again, we don't represent 100 individuals, but we represent several thousand families, you know, throughout Berkeley and the East Bay. Okay. So again, please continue to talk it up, but give me some feedback. If this was not helpful, please let me know.
This was excellent.
It was excellent. Yes.
All right. All right. So I'm just, you know, like I say, I'm trying to make sure it works for y'all. You know, because, and again, you know, I try to be balanced. And like I said, I'm not really interested in spending a lot of time talking about presidential, you know, elections, because y'all get inundated with that. You know, giving you honest things about the front runners and the tough things. You know, Measure 1 is really tough, because we know that there's major issues when it comes to behavioral health, homelessness, supporting veterans, and things like that. But whatever we need to do. Anybody else? Insight, questions? All right, y'all. Well, I thank you. We finished almost a half hour early. And you know, we're trying to be efficient. I really thank you. And again, shouts out to Young Lives Matters, Family Spirit Center, Friends of Adeline, you know, NAACP, BEMA in particular, you know, and for all of y'all that have been in this space, that are continuing to do this work. I thank Michael for being the co-host. You know, y'all know I'm always technologically challenged, and trying to run slides and talk at the same time has never been my strong suit. So thanks God for him. And we will do a follow-up on this in about a week and a half. These slides will be available. Please note that if you are not registered and you intend to register, February 20th is that deadline for the March 5th primary. And I just thank God for each of you. And I hope that the NAACP meeting goes well this afternoon. And I am available if you need me. To God be the glory, and blessings upon all of you. And I appreciate each and everything that you do to make our community a more livable place. Y'all have a great day. Love you much.
All right,
Okay,
thank you,
thank
bro.
you, Pastor Mike.
Thank you. All right, have a good
Bye-bye.
one.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, come here for a minute.